Okay, hello everyone. My name's Andrew Lane. I work at the Guildhall Art Gallery and London's Roman Amphitheatre, at Billingsgate Roman House and Baths, and also the City of London Police Museum, all three venues of which are maintained by the City of London Corporation. And today I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Jane Sidell from Historic England. Jane Sidell is an inspector of ancient monuments, and she is going to give a talk on the London Wall. And this is one of a series of talks on Roman archaeology that we're bringing together under the heading of Our City Together, that aims to put cultural activities online. So let me just introduce, firstly, my colleague, Kim Biddulph. Hello, Kim.
Hello.
And now Jane Sidell.
Hello.
Okay, so I think, yeah, without further ado, over to you, Jane.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Well, I'm really pleased to be here because whilst I'm in my loft, there's nothing I like more than talking about archaeology. This is my normal environment. I'm normally to be found down a hole looking at London's historic and ancient monuments. This is my job, and normally I'll be looking at a whole range of things, but the City of London has got a very dense concentration of Roman archaeology surviving, and it's my job to help people like the City of London look after these ancient monuments. The London Wall is a really interesting survival. On this map, at the top of the map, you can see the line of the wall, including one of the gates. That's actually Moorgate, still very built up. This is a medieval map from the 16th century, and it shows the survival of the wall. Rather less of it survives now, but it's surprising how much you can still walk around London and actually see. And what I want to do is take you on a walk around some of the visible parts of the wall, so when we're all able to get out again, people will be able to go and have a look and discover some of these sites for themselves. How do we know about the wall? How do we know about its archaeology and its history? Fortunately, people have been researching Roman London for several hundred years. And this is the frontispiece from one of my favourite and most prized books, which I've actually got on the floor beside me here. This is the Royal Commission's survey of Roman London. It was published in 1928, and a huge amount of information is contained within it. But of course, we've found some things since then. So this is a great start, but we have discovered things since then, and we're still surprisingly finding bits of London Wall. A new section was found a few years ago, and I'm very pleased to say that that piece is on show, and I'll show a picture of that shortly. Now, Roman London didn't always have a wall. The wall actually came quite late. Early Roman London looked a little bit like this, and from where you're sitting or standing, you're looking towards the southeast. You're looking across London, across where St Paul's is now. If you imagine a bridge in the middle of the river there, that would be London Bridge, and you'd be looking across at Southwark. And early Roman London didn't actually have a defensive wall. It would have had a ditch, and it would have had an earth bank, but it didn't have a defensive wall at all. This is early on, from the foundation of London in AD 47. Now, in AD...
Could I just ask on that picture, why there would have been a bridge, wouldn't there? I don't know why that's not on this picture.
This is probably at almost exactly the time the bridge would have been built. There was the first bridge, we think, was destroyed by Boudicca. So there would have been a very early pontoon bridge, probably boats lashed together. And then there was a very early bridge which got destroyed by Boudicca, and then we get the first proper permanent bridge. Okay. So it is slightly strange to see it, but very early London was pretty much a frontier outpost. It's a very, very long way from Rome. Right, yeah, so Boudicca, who was Queen of the Iceni, she came in from East Anglia, and she destroyed Roman London as it was in its early stage. And after that, the city really starts developing, but we don't get the wall until still significantly after them. this is how Roman London would have looked at its height. And this is looking from roughly the same perspective as that previous drawing. And you see the bridge is now in place from Southwark. And you see that the wall encircles the city on the north bank of the Thames. And it's a very robust wall, but it doesn't actually get built until quite late. And it doesn't get built, we think, for defensive reasons. There's no archaeological or historical evidence to indicate that there was any possibility of invasion. So we think the wall was partly built out of the enhanced status of London as a city, as part of civic pride, and possibly as something to keep the army occupied. Now, this is the only vital statistic sheet. I'm hoping to use images throughout, but just a few facts and figures about the Roman wall that encircled Londinium. 3.5 kilometers long, and as you see, built around AD 190 to 225. It's difficult to be exactly sure, and it would probably have taken a couple of years to build it. But yes, built quite late. Boudicca burnt London down in AD 60 or 61. And you see, we don't get the wall for at least another 130 years after that. It's built with ragstone, which is brought up the Medway River from Kent, and it has
yeah,
these.
We had a talk by Simon Elliott actually about ragstone.
Okay.
So you can go and watch that video after you've watched this one.
It's a great thing, because London, of course, has no building stone, so all the stone has to come from somewhere else. The brick was probably made in London. There are brick kilns certainly in the Moorgate area, so that probably came locally. And we think the whole lot was new, unscavenged material. And I've put a tiny asterisk there because in the 4th century, some bastions, some towers were added to the outside wall of the eastern section of the wall. And they do seem to have scavenged, but otherwise it was brand new material for the wall. Quite thick at the base, and then it narrows as it increases in height. And then there would have been a walkway for soldiers to patrol the wall at the top. So maybe 16 foot tall, but we're not entirely sure. So those are the facts and figures of the wall. And then this is a typical cross section of the wall as you will see it as you walk around now. Because what's happened in many places is the Roman wall survives to a certain height, and you can see the very orderly part of the wall at the bottom half of, I don't know if you can see my cursor. This is the Roman bit here. And then in the medieval period, from about 1260, the wall gets increased in height. And it's much less ordered because ragstone again is scavenged from the ruined buildings of Roman London, and the medieval build is nowhere near as orderly as the Roman build, and that tells you quite a lot about the people building it. And then in the 15th century, you get this crenellated section at the top with the crisscross patterns. And that's from the War of the Roses, when London got refortified yet again. And some of that does survive, and I'll show a picture of where you can see that. Now, we had a teaser here of Russell Crowe. This is because we think the wall was built by the military. There was a garrison in London. It wasn't a Roman legion, it was an auxiliary garrison, and the honour guard for the governor. And we think that they built the wall, and possibly one reason was job creation. If you have several thousand soldiers that don't have a lot to do and don't have wars to fight, then sometimes they get a little bit restless. And so finding projects for them to do is well known across the Roman Empire. And it's one of the things that I find really touching about the survival of London Wall, that it was probably built by a group of men, and they will have been men, who came from all over the empire. They ended up in this very much outpost of the Roman Empire. And they probably came from modern day North Africa, from Spain, from Romania, from all sorts of places, Greece. And they ended up here building the wall that still survives in Roman London, that you can go and see, that was built by all these probably younger men than this cartoon suggests. And it still survives. And I find that fantastic, that all these different people and all these different cultures have contributed to part of the fabric surviving in London today. Right, the blue line that you can dimly see on this drawing, this is the line of London Wall, and we are starting off in the southeast corner. And this is a drawing of the end of Roman London in the area now of the Tower of London. There was a riverside wall that you can see here. Now, none of this survives above ground level in London today, so I'm not really going to talk about that, but some of it is buried and protected. What I want to talk about is the Landward Wall that starts from this corner here, and this is in the Tower of London now, and again, you can see this. And the first section that you see is actually here, the Wardrobe Tower at the Tower of London. So this is one of the later bastions that was added, but this is on the line of the London Wall as it goes from south from the river, heading up north to Tower Hill tube station. So obviously you need to be inside the Tower of London to see this, and quite frankly, it's not cheap to get into the Tower of London, but most of the bits of the wall that survive you can see for free. This is perhaps one of the best stretches, and this is outside the Tower of London, and it's right next to Tower Hill tube station. And it's a really good example because it shows you the height of the wall, and it also shows you very clearly the construction. So we talked about the courses of Kentish ragstone that you see very nicely here, but also the Roman brick courses. And these tie the wall together very well because you get a very good face, very well built on the outside and the inside of the wall, but the wall itself in cross section is made up of a whole load of rubble that's not properly carved, that's held together with lime mortar. And so you see this is the outside, and it's quite a fair face, but the inside is very, very rubbly, and you need these brick courses to make sure that the two inside and outside faces don't actually fall apart. And so the construction is very good, and these brick string courses are for engineering purposes as well as decorative. So whenever
and we get that at Billingsgate bathhouse as well, don't we? The same construction method.
It's mainly the same. In the house at Billingsgate, it's the same.
Yeah, the house, yeah.
The bath is a bit different because it's using much more brick than stone. And I have a feeling that's because of the different thermal properties of the brick rather than the stone. So it's the contrast between the wall and the bathhouse is really interesting. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the wall has been destroyed over the last 150 years or so. This is a stretch that was very close to the piece I've just shown, and this was destroyed when the railway line was being put in. So unfortunately, some of this was lost, but brilliantly, about 7 years ago, this stretch turned up. It had been completely embedded within buildings and partly buried below ground. About half of this was buried below ground. But this stretch turned up when the new Citizen M Hotel was built, again at Tower Hill Tube Station. And you can now see this from the public pavement. You can see this stretch just at the side of the Citizen M Hotel. Because when we found this, we got tremendously excited that new bits of wall are still popping up. So we insisted between myself and the City of London that this was preserved and visible so people can see it. So it's a great new stretch. And again, you see how nice and orderly the Kentish ragstone and the Roman brick is in the string courses. This is the section that adjoins it. This is known as the Cooper's Row stretch, and this is in the courtyard of the Grange Hotel. And as you can see, most of what you're seeing is not in those nice orderly lines. It's much more rubbly. And also you have two great big windows, and that's because this is the medieval rebuild, and these windows were for archers. But again, it's a fantastic section, and it shows you how big and how dominant the wall would have been in the landscape in the medieval period from about the 1260s onward. But it's a very good stretch, and you can see both both sides of the wall. There's a passageway through it, so you can see both sides easily, and you can just walk into the courtyard of the hotel and see this. And there's also a little interpretation panel there. Right, so we've moved up from the tower, and we're now at one of the first bends in the wall. It's not entirely straight, it does encircle Roman London. And we start getting some more eccentric survivals. This is known as the America Square stretch of wall. And a nice thing that you can see here, we're looking at the outside of the wall. So we were standing outside London. And this detail here, this is the plinth of the Roman wall. It's made of red sandstone, and again that's been imported to London. But if you see this, you know that's where Roman ground level was, because across London the Roman levels are different. At the very heart of London, at Bank Tube Station, Roman ground level is 9 meters below ground level now. And this does vary, and at the edges of Roman London, it's not quite as deep. This is in the basement of a conference centre, and it's why there's some strange lighting and strange sort of disco arrangements around here. So it's, again, a very odd survival, but it's great that we have these. And sometimes if it's quiet, you can just go into the building and ask the receptionist if you can nip downstairs and have a look, and often they'll be quite happy to let you go and have a look. But it's just a nice detail, the red sandstone plinth here. Now this is the next section heading north up the road on Crutched Friars, a reference to one of the medieval friaries in this area. This is a rather sad looking piece of wall because, as you can see, it's held up on bricks. And this again was discovered in the early 20th century, in about 1905. And at the moment it's not visible. This was in the basement of a rather seedy nightclub until quite recently. It's a really odd survival, and this is one of the great quirks of the City of London, is you can turn a corner or open a lavatory door and find the strangest of things. And we did find a piece of this in the lavatory in the nightclub. Brilliantly, this one, this is the other side of it, but this is part of a development that's taking place at the moment, and the office blocks in which this is encased are now going to become student residences. But part of the planning permission is that this wall will become visible from the public streets. You'll be able to stand on the street and look down into a big atrium, and you'll be able to see this. And again, you should be able to walk in and look at it, and there'll be an interpretation panel again. And the beady-eyed amongst you will have seen that we've got the red sandstone plinth again. So we're looking at the outside here, whereas the seedy nightclub was inside Roman London, which is, I think, quite appropriate. But I'm really pleased to say that probably in a couple of years, you'll be able to go in and see this. And even if you're just walking past, you'll be able to see it out of the corner of your eye and think, crikey, that's a really good piece of Roman wall. Now, interpretation is something that I want to ask Andrew and Kim about at this point, because we have these pieces of wall, and people that know what they're looking at will understand that it's part of a Roman structure or Roman and medieval. But how should we provide interpretation for the people that suddenly come upon these things?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, you do Roman wall tours in real life when you're able to, aren't you, Jane, from time to time?
I do, and I think some of the City of London guides do as well. You do need to know they're happening.
Yes, exactly.
I think the walls are absolutely amazing, and they're probably one of the most important parts of Roman London that we still have. And it would be nice that if everything could be joined up and we could have interpretation which went from each of the sites and was the same at each site, so sort of consistency going through. But
because there are some interpretation boards at some places, aren't there, but not at all of them.
Haha, there we go. that's the one that I was thinking of.
There are. A lot of people like things on the internet or on their mobile phones, and there are things available on the internet. The wall walk, some of the data sheets are. And the Museum of London had an app until relatively recently, but because operating systems change so often, they haven't been able to upgrade it. So the app doesn't exist anymore, which is a shame.
That
And
was
so
the
I'm agreeing.
Londinium street map, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it doesn't work anymore.
Mm.
This is why I like panels on site. And you're right, Andrew, having consistent ones is really important. And there were a series of these. You can see it says number 21. So there were, I think, about 23. But some have been vandalized and some have been damaged and some are in safekeeping. But these are really good because they give you a reasonable amount of information, but brilliantly, they tell you where they are, where you are, and they tell you where the next one is. So you can guide yourself around to a certain extent, but it would be great if we could get a little bit more interpretation.
I mean, this is basically archaeology itself, isn't it? These lovely boards, these tile boards.
Yeah, they're retro. I think we'll call it. I think we'll call it retro. But I have to admit, I like the nice basic, what's the word, analog approach to interpretation, because if you suddenly just happen upon a piece of Roman wall and there's a board, at least you can find out something about it. But it's something all of us working in the heritage of London need to keep on our radar. Anyway, let's move on. This is the silliest piece of surviving Roman wall. This is in the basement of the Cass Business School, and it genuinely is halfway up a wall in a cupboard. So you're looking at the cross section of it here, and inside Roman London is to your right. And I put it in, you can't get in and see it. I put it in just to show that people have tried extremely hard in the past to protect the wall and make it visible. So this is the silliest. This is my favourite. This is moving slightly further up the road. This is in the basement of the 3 Tons pub, and the wall forms one wall of their beer cellar. You can see that the wall is nicely protected with a perspex screen with an air gap between the barrels of beer. So yeah, this is again a very good one. And sometimes if the pub isn't busy, in future you can perhaps go in and ask if you can have a look at their beer cellar. As long as you buy a pint or 2 of beer, I think they'll probably oblige if it's quiet. Now sometimes, unfortunately, we find new pieces of the wall during works in the street. This is actually the first gate that you come to. This is Aldgate, the old gate. And what you can see between the orange pipes is some of the stone of the Roman gate that we found a few years ago. Unfortunately, we were able to make sure it was all protected and nicely wrapped up. But sometimes survival doesn't exist above ground and it's only below ground. And then this is a drawing of one of the bastions that I mentioned that were added in the later Roman period. And it was made up of scavenged material, including quite elaborate pieces of sculpture. This isn't one from that piece, but it's a recent find of the sort of sculpture that seems to have been ripped off building, and this was thrown in the city ditch, recovered a few years ago. And for some reason, people were demolishing buildings and then rebuilding the Roman wall bastions with them. Fortunately, for some of these destroyed sections, we have some really good drawings of them. This again is from about 1905. And this is as we're coming along to the northern stretch of London Wall, because the bulk of that has been destroyed above ground, sometimes encapsulated into church walls, and this is part of All Hallows on the wall. But at least we've got some drawings of what it looked like. And this one's very interesting because at the base of the wall, below the plinth, you can see that there's a little culvert or drainage slot, because sometimes we ask very boring questions about, well, how did the drainage work? How did the sewers work? And so this drawing from 1902 shows that detail. Right, so this is where we've come to at the moment. We've come along the Moorgate area and we're coming to a couple of interesting good survivals in this area of the wall above ground. This was a recent record from the Crossrail excavations where a tiny bit popped up below ground. But this again is one of the very odd examples. This is the city wall in the car park below London Wall. And London Wall, the street, is not the same place as London Wall, the wall. And so this is where it does coincide. And it's in a terrible state. It's in an underground car park. It's dirty and neglected. But the thing is, it's been there for 1800 years, and it can probably survive quite happily for another 1800 years if people look after it. And it may be that in just 100 years, no one will be driving cars anymore. So this will endure, whereas I suspect the car park is not going to endure at all. So we consider the vulnerability of these really quite often, and this is why it's something that all of us looking after the wall think about. But we also have to think about it has survived for this long, so long as we can keep it surviving and provide interpretation, if people understand what they're looking at and how interesting the stories they tell are, then hopefully they'll help us look after it. So this is why the poor piece in the car park, I'm hoping, will survive for much longer than the cars and the car park itself. This is another section that was incorporated into a church. The church is no longer there, but the wall does survive, and it's recently been conserved and worked on quite extensively. This is known as St Alphege, and you can see quite clearly the War of the Roses stretch at the top, with the crenellations and the decorative crisscross work known as diaper work. And this one we were just completing before lockdown started. So the interpretation panels may not all have completely gone in, but there are, I think, 3 interpretation panels now on this stretch, which tells you about the Roman wall, the medieval wall, and then the War of the Roses wall. And again, it's one of the best stretches, and it's in the public realm, so you can just walk up to it. And in fact, you can have your sandwiches here at lunchtime and enjoy being either inside or outside Roman London. And at the moment, we're looking at the outside of the wall again. This is not a very good photo, so I'll move on and show this. This is the corner of the Roman wall and the Roman fort. And this is one of these bastions I was talking about. Now, this is not one of the Roman bastions. Another series were added in the 13th century. And this is the best surviving one. This is known as Bastion 12, because the Royal Commission survey I mentioned numbered everything, fortunately. So all these stretches and bastions have numbers. And this one, again, you can see from the Barbican estate. And I love this photo because it shows the medieval bastion, which is protected as a scheduled monument, and then the listed building of the Barbican estate, and it contrasts the ancient and modern really nicely. It's a good survival, this one, and it shows very clearly again the size of these bastions and the defensive requirement that there was in the medieval period in London, because London did surprisingly often come under attack from the rest of the country. And this is Bastion 14, not quite as tall. Again, you get a good idea of the construction. It's really quite random. There's not a lot of order to this. And this one's visible again from the Museum of London, from inside the Roman Gallery at the Museum of London. So when that reopens, if it's a rainy day, you can see this from inside the Roman Gallery. So we're just going to turn the corner. We've got the Roman fort tucked up in this corner of the wall. So we've got a few examples of that. This is the base of the gateway into the Roman fort. And again, we were conserving this just before lockdown. This was the last site visit I made. So we've been conserving this and cleaning this up. And again, there's good interpretation in here. Now, it's not open all of the time, but sometimes tours are run into here by people like myself, the City of London guides, and the Museum of London. So hopefully, once lockdown lifts, we'll be able to take you back in here again. And then coming out into the fresh air, this is Noble Street, and this stretch shows a really good set of surviving walls. In the foreground here, this is the medieval wall that then was built on in the 18th and 19th century. All the brick that you can see is from warehouses that used the medieval wall. And then at the far end of the garden, this little square piece is the base of the Roman turrets in the Roman fort. Romans normally went in for straight lines, but at the corners of Roman forts, they had curved corners. So this wall that you can see here is the corner of the Roman fort, and then it has a little square turret inside that would go up to the parapet. And so this is how the soldiers, they'd climb up ladders inside these turrets and get out onto the parapet walkway from there. Now, unfortunately, very little of the wall survives that's visible in the public realm from there. This is Postman's Park, and there is a little stretch in the corner of the park that if you climb through the bushes and look down, you can see. There's a surviving stretch in what's now the Bank of America building. This was found again in 1909. And it does survive, but it's very difficult to convince the Bank of America that they want to open to the public, but they will do occasionally. And it's a very good stretch of the corner of the London Wall as it turns, heading down southwards towards the river. And there's again just another picture of it. So really, practically nothing survives on this last stretch heading down from the Arrow down towards the Thames. Again, we've got some photographs of what was destroyed at Newgate Street. And then we have this very, very odd stretch in the basement of the Old Bailey. And I practically had to give a blood sample to get into the basement of the Old Bailey, because obviously it's a court and so it's very secure. But we do have a little bit surviving. So that's me patting it from one side, and that's my colleague Ian patting it from the boiler room side. Now, it might be that unlike the car park, this doesn't come out in the next 20 or 30 years, but it, at least at the moment, is protected, and that's the key. As archaeologists, we're in this for the long haul. We're protecting these sites for the next 500, 1,000 years. And so whilst it's in a very odd situation in the Old Bailey, it will at least be quite well looked after. And then this is the last visible stretch. This is in Amen Court, and you can see that it's been built around and you've only got this tiny stretch left in here. And that's the last piece that you can see, unfortunately. The rest of the wall would have been under Blackfriars down towards the river. But I hope that's shown you that there's a lot that does survive that you can just happen upon. The route is easily walkable, and there is a certain amount of interpretation. So if you want to go out and walk along the route, you can take information from the internet with you, but you will find some interpretation panels as you walk along. There's quite a lot. I'm afraid this one is, at the moment, I think people have been putting face masks on this statue of the Emperor. So this might be where you'd start. This is at Tower Hill Tube Station, and there are several interpretation panels here. And of course, this statue to give you a good idea. So I hope that's provided you with a good tour, and I hope that's encouraged you to go out and when we can go out safely, walk along the route and learn a lot more about Roman London.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Jane. I want to give you a round of applause.
That's right. That's absolutely fine. No, I do.
Andrew, did you have a question?
I'd just like to thank Jane for that talk. It was absolutely fascinating, and it's just a reminder of just how much archaeology there is still to see in London, and a reminder of me that there's lots of little sections of the wall that I haven't seen that in the future I must go and make an effort to look up. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and I want to thank you. You work very hard to try and get these bits on display all the time, and that's great to have that, you kind of championing all of the Roman and other archaeology as well. Thank you. So this is the first of 2 tours that Jane is giving for us. So I will leave the information here. You can see London Roman Baths on Twitter and cityoflondon.gov.uk/bathhouse if you want to send us any questions. And Jane's second tour of the interior of Londinium will be out in a few days.